Welcome, everybody.
We are live.
My name is Jason Aponte.
I am Andrew Pasquini.
We're working. That's it. We're working over here. That's it. Let's go Niners.
Let's go Niners. Sprint Ride Option Podcast. Oh my goodness, we are live. It is a new episode of the Sprint Ride Option Podcast. I'm Andrew Pasquini, joined as always by Jason Aponte, but we have a special guest today. Second time he's been on the podcast. Dr. Nirav Pandya. How you doing, doctor?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on. Obviously, a lot of stuff going on with the 49ers, so hopefully it's nothing serious for the rest of the season.
Doc, we're going to use you to talk many 49er fans off the ledge a little bit, and we want to do this with facts and actual science, and not it's easy for Andrew and I to just jump on here and say, hey, everything's going to be fine. I think it's better to hear it from an actual doctor who has actual experience doing this stuff.
Absolutely.
We really like to tread the everything is fine water here on the Sprint Ride Option Podcast. So it's nice to have that confirmation. And my hand will go up. I think I'm kind of at blame for this episode. I said Friday on this podcast after the Niners that humongous victory over the Packers in week 1 of the preseason.
Huge.
Hey, everybody came out healthy except for Drake Jackson and Dante Johnson. And then the next couple of days just blew up in my face. Niners have a few injuries. I don't know how concerned we are about them, but this is why we have you to have you tell us how concerned we should be. And I believe the first one we're going to start with is Jimmy Ward, because that was the one that came out a little bit out of left field. We didn't hear anything after the game. From what it sounds like, he suffered a pretty bad hamstring injury during the practice on August 14th. That was the day, I believe, after the preseason game, or 2 days after the preseason game. The pulled hamstring could keep him out week 1 against Chicago. So the first question is, Jimmy Ward, very important player on this defense, very important player on the Niners as a whole. How serious is this? How serious do you think it is? And could it lead to serious, some lingering issues throughout the season?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you do get a little bit concerned. Hamstring strains are so common in the NFL. When the coach and the team kind of comes out and says, look, this is a pretty bad one, you do get a little bit more concerned. And I think number one, the worst type of hamstring injury, and you kind of grade them 1 to 3, is the grade 3. And that's where the muscle either completely tears or it pulls off the bone. The fact that they didn't say this is going to be like a 3 to 4 month thing, he's not getting surgery, that's reassuring. So that's number one. So we know we aren't losing him for a season, because there's about a certain percentage of people who will have these really serious hamstring injuries and then they're gone. That's could be potentially career-ending, could be something that lasts several months. So we're kind of out of the neck of the woods with that. So typically this sounds like a grade 2. So what a grade 2 is a partial tear. So typically when you think about these muscle injuries, grade 1 is like microscopic tearing. That's kind of what all of us kind of get when we're trying to, play sports or sprint in our 30s and 40s. So things kind of happen. We get these microscopic tears. Grade 2, where you actually will see if you get an MRI where there's actual partial tearing of the muscle, and that can be sometimes up to 4 to 6 weeks. So if you're thinking that maybe this is maybe in 1.5, thinking of a couple weeks, I'm not super concerned about him getting back during the season, but I think the key thing is, as you mentioned, making sure he's getting back when he's completely recovered. The worst thing you can do is you have a little bit of soreness, you have a little bit of tenderness in the area. Look, I want to get out there, especially in an explosive position. And the next thing you know, then it's 8 weeks, and then it's the season. So it might be even better. Let's wait till week 2, week 3 to make sure this doesn't become something that becomes recurring. But if you treat it properly, hopefully this isn't a thing that should be something that pops up as the season goes on.
It seems to me that we are in the early stages of everything that's going on this season. But in 2020, and I know that that's a season that we all have erased from our memory, like Men in Black, we have gotten rid of it. It never happened. We were never there. But it was all high ankle sprains. It's all hamstring injuries, apparently, right now. Is there anything that can be done from a conditioning standpoint, from a training standpoint, to help prevent these things? Or are these just bad luck things that are happening and you can't do anything about it?
No, that's a great question. I think everyone's kind of worried about this quote unquote soft tissue injury problem. Yeah, I think in general, every year, if you look at NFL teams, if you kind of hang around on other Twitters of other teams, you see why are these injuries happening? Why are all these soft tissue things happening? I think it's common to see a lot of injuries the first couple of weeks of the preseason, the first couple of times of the season. But when you do see one particular injury like hamstrings, and you got to think, okay, is there something particularly that may be going on with the training or how these players kind of preparing themselves in the off season? So I think if you look globally at what causes hamstring injuries, having a prior hamstring injury and going back to the Trent Baalke era, players have injuries before, they're probably going to be injured again. So if you're looking at drafting players who may have had problems in college, maybe in prior seasons, that's number one. But you can't really change that. Number two, you have to think about, is there an issue with flexibility? So a lot of times people have poor flexibility maybe when they're coming in. That can be a risk factor. And then number three, you have to think about general fatigue. And I think that's the thing that's most controllable. You can't control prior injury history. It's hard to control flexibility for these elite athletes. But if they are coming in, they're fatigued, they've been working really hard, they're doing a lot of explosive things, then that's something that can be modified that you can potentially then prevent that risk of injury. So I think looking at the training schedules, looking at how are they doing. I know Shanahan said he didn't like the explosive days and then take a couple of days off. I think you have to look for consistency in terms of training. And if you can do that, then maybe you can potentially prevent these injuries. But they have tons of people looking at this stuff. So it may just be a string of bad luck. But I think if we see this pop into week 1, week 2 of the season, then it may be time to kind of take a look at and see what are some of the things we can do to prevent this specific injury, as opposed to like all injuries taking place.
Andrew, you can read this one, man.
Oh, yeah, Jake.
And Doc, this is a very serious, podcast. We are very serious, but we do have some very. We try to keep it light, and this is one of our better commenters. And Andrew, you can read it, man.
Hello, Doc. My friend noticed a lump on my back, and I just told him I got that dog in me, and he said, "No, you got an abscess in you." Is he right?
I mean, that's a tough question. I'll defer on that one without an exam. But I heard people say they've got a dog in them, but it could be a lot of different things,
It's the meme that this podcast has carried the past few weeks.
Sure.
So we've enjoyed
Exactly.
it.
For sure.
The last question I had just on Jimmy Ward's injury, and it's more of a clerical thing because when the injury first came out, it was described as a hamstring pull. And now it seems like we've switched it to a hamstring strain. What's the difference between the two, if there is any difference at all? Is it just what they decide to call it? I'm assuming it's more scientific than just that, but is it just that?
It is. It's actually, they're both the same thing. So when we think about pull versus strain, same exact thing, doesn't mean anything different. I think pull is kind of the way we kind of describe it, kind of more like commonly, I pulled my hamstring. But a pull means that the muscle's basically been, basically stretched more than it should. And a strain is the same thing. So basically just two different ways to describe it. Doesn't mean one's any better than the other. Just they mean the same thing. Yeah.
So Doc, I have a question. And when it comes to hamstring injuries, it's happened across multiple positions, right? We've got a strong safety with it. Free safety with it. We've got a running back with it. We've got a lineman with it. Is there any more position that is concerning to have that than others? I mean, it's never good, I'm guessing, but is there one position that's more concerning than others in terms of having this issue?
I'll probably say defensive backs more than anything else. I think number one, it's the speed they're playing with.
Better.
Sorry. Sorry. The defensive backs, and people say, well, why not wide receivers? Well, a lot of wide receiver route running, where you're going, so you can kind of control your speed and where your explosiveness is, and you kind of know, like, okay, I'm hitting 10 yards out. That's where I'm really going to accelerate or deaccelerate. Defensive back just has to go, and they don't know. So not only is it speed, it's the unpredictability. So defensive backs would be the one that I'd be most concerned about, which is unfortunately what obviously we're dealing with Jimmy Ward.
And then, Jason, you pulled this one up. Gammon had the question. I saw it. I wanted to bring it up. Are football players known for having hamstrings stronger than their quads or vice versa? Is this why our players are getting injured?
That's an excellent question. So when I was talking about risk factors, one of the things they also look at is we call it muscle imbalance. So if your quads are stronger than your hamstrings, you're more likely to get hamstring strains. And a lot of football players, and you look at someone like Nick Bosa, monster quads, that does place you at risk of having, more hamstring issues. So a lot of the lifts you do in football in general naturally will work your quads a lot more. So one of the things we're seeing across sports is trying to balance that out. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're making your quads weaker. It's bringing your hamstrings up to it. So definitely that is one risk factor. Strong quads compared to hamstrings, then this places more strain on the hamstrings. Yeah.
Awesome.
Perfect. Great question, Gammon. That's why we love the live chat questions
squad.
that Jason and I don't think about, and we get them covered. We're going to change to a player. We asked about you the last time you were on the podcast, Mike McGlinchey. He came up a little bit in the injury report this week. He had slight irritation in his right knee. From what I read, it's the same leg as the quad he tore last season. So quad knee injury. Shanahan said, quote, the good news was his surgical repair and all the stuff he did this offseason was good, but he has some slight irritation in his knee. So we're going to have to be smart with him this week. I'll be surprised if he does anything in Minnesota. And Kyle Shanahan's job is to calm the masses about this. So I'll ask you, is the surgery on the quad, could it possibly be doing anything with the knee right now? Is that something that could be causing knee inflammation, or is this something totally separate?
I think it's probably related, and I'm not super concerned about it. I mean, one of the things you have to, that we all have to understand is that the surgery they had is on the main muscle that helps to power the knee. So there's going to be more irritation in that area. It's also going to potentially be a little bit weaker, so the knee is going to be more susceptible to have these kind of flare-ups as well, too. So the fact that McGlinchey is on the field and actually playing, that's huge. As we talked about last time, about 50% of NFL players after these injuries don't even make it back. So he's already made that huge hurdle of getting back on the field. But there is going to be irritation this first season, particularly since it's the muscle that you want to have nice and strong to have healthy knees. So the fact that he's coming back, there's some irritation. It's better to be safe, not necessarily due to the fact that he's going to re-injure his quad. I mean, that's obviously a risk, but you don't want him then to subsequently then get a meniscus injury, get an ACL injury because his quad is irritated and sore. So taking time is totally safe, particularly with the position that he plays, where he's going to have to do a lot of stuff in the trenches, be very powerful, have that quad and knee be very, very stable. So I'm not concerned about it, but something that they need to be watching to make sure that it doesn't flare up more and more throughout the season.
Doc, here's a question. Did you get a chance to watch the preseason game? Mike had one series when he was out there.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely did see it. Yeah.
And I know it's broadcast angle and everything, and we really I couldn't surmise anything just watching anything. Did you see anything that would have you worried or encouraged either way?
No, he looked great. I mean, honestly, if you look at the video and compare him to McGlinchey from a couple of years ago, it looked the same. He didn't look that different. So there wasn't anything movement wise. I think it's just simply the fact that he just hasn't played football in a while. It's a hard thing to do. So there's going to be irritation. I think it's good that they're kind of noticing it now. So they may even have things like a snap count for him as the season kind of begins, and then kind of gradually ramp him back up, almost like a basketball player or something like that. So I definitely do think that his movement looks good, which makes me feel that his injury is healed. It's just a matter of conditioning coming back into place. And you just can't recreate that unless you're actually playing. So you play a game, you're a little bit sore. Okay, we'll kind of increase it up a little bit next week, make sure all the symptoms are gone. So nothing concerning from this standpoint, and hopefully nothing else develops as the season goes on.
Love it.
I guess on top of that too, just something you said with injuries being connected to the body. Obviously, everything in the body's connected. And you're a Warriors fan. I know you're a very big Warriors fan.
Yeah.
We've had instances in the past where Kevin Durant's calf is injured. He goes out too early. The Achilles tears. Klay Thompson torn ACL going into the torn Achilles. And in the rehab process, is the rehab process just focusing on the one body part that was injured, like with McGlinchey, the calf? Or is it expand out a little bit where McGlinchey's working the calf, the knee, the ankle, everything in that sort of area?
No, they definitely are working everything, and I think that's really the transition that's happened over the past 10 to 15 years. And that's also a reason why a lot of injuries aren't career ending anymore. Like you think about 15, 20 years ago, someone had an ACL tear and you'd never see them again. And part of that was that they just, they rehab that particular body part, but then they didn't rehab anything else. And they get back and they're totally out of shape. They injure something else. So they definitely do work on everything in the body. The thing that's hard with football as opposed to like basketball or baseball, other sports, is that you can't recreate the hitting. You can't recreate that game speed. So for a lot of football players, it takes a longer period of time for that return to occur. So that's why you get a basketball player and you're like, wow, that player's back after an ACL. He looks great. As opposed to a football player, it's like, oh, they didn't really look normal until season 2, season 3. So I do think that's the nature of the sport, makes it a little bit harder to kind of recreate what you're going to do. But they definitely do in the rehab process, especially with athletes over the past 5 to 10 years, really work on everything. So you don't necessarily see those secondary injuries as much in football players, but you do see less of a good performance early on because they are going much slower in terms of bringing them back.
Okay, Gammon, again, shout out to the Mod Squad. He has a really good question, too. A question about medical timetables and timelines for players to return. Is there a difference between clinical timelines for when regular people can return to duty versus athletes? Do athletes heal fast?
That's a great question. So I think there are a couple different things. I think, yeah, definitely for let's say an Achilles tear, you take something like that. Usual for the general public, you'd say, look, you get back to doing all your stuff at 6 months. But for athletes, you actually extend that timeline out farther because of what they're doing and what they're stressing their body. So, for the person who plays basketball or football, flag football on the weekend, you're not going to necessarily be stressing your legs that much. You say, hey, you go back at 6 months. But it's the fact that you have to get back to an elite level of play where things get pushed out longer. So
Wow.
Remember, these athletes are really, they have to basically go up against people who've been training for the past year or two, while they've been rehabbing. So you need that time to get back up to speed. So people say, why did it, take this athlete? Why am I getting back to go back earlier as opposed to this athlete that took a year? Well, it's like, well, you're stressing your body differently. So I think that's where the timelines are a little bit different. And it's not necessarily that athletes heal any quicker. I mean, when an athlete gets an ACL tear, that ACL is healed at the same point as someone who gets it done off the street. The difference is that because they're rehabbing, they may look like they're doing better because they've developed all this muscle strength. So it's a 24/7 rehab that makes it appear as if they're healing faster, but biologically, like in a lab, Nick Bosa's ACL healed the same as the 35-year-old recreational basketball player if you look inside his knee, but it's everything around Bosa's knee that makes him feel like he did so much better from his ACL surgery than that, the 30-year-old who got it done.
AG Fox wants to know, Doc, are the Seahawks the most annoying fan base in the NFL? And what's the medical term for their affliction? Thanks, I'll hang up and listen.
It's called envy, the diagnosis of envy,
It's the same illness Laker fans have had as late.
Yeah, although I'll say I grew up in Chicago, so I would have to say Packers fans are like Seahawks fans. Growing up as a Bears fan, so definitely Packers and Seahawks fans very similar. Bears 49ers, you got kind of similar, which would be great because Bears 49ers, they open up the season, so it'll be a very.
So week one, I was about to say week one is big for you, Doc, right? Like week one is like must win, right? Like it's like put it out there, like yeah.
I'm gonna win either way. Either I can, tell my Chicago friends we won or my fans around here. So it'll be, I think the 49ers are significantly better than the Bears this year. That's a whole podcast in and of itself. But.
Yeah. To quote our good friend, Eric Crocker, the Bears are, and I'm not going to say the word because I don't want to, pound on them or anything like that. But yeah, I think we all agree right there at that point.
Okay. So did you adopt, like now I'm on the Chicago thing. Did you adopt the Warriors? Were you always a Warriors fan or did you evolve from the Bulls?
Yeah, so I always joke. I've been around great basketball my entire life.
Yes.
So grew up in Chicago. I was in high school and junior high when the Bulls won their championship. Went to Philly for residency. Caught the Iverson time. It was great. And then I moved out here and I got the Warriors. So all I've seen is like dynasties. I saw. And my bad time was seeing a couple of years of Iverson, which is phenomenal. So the Warriors were an easier kind of sell for me because the Bulls have just been horrendous since Jordan is gone. But it's interesting in Chicago, there's a lot of hates for Bears fans and pretty much the Packers is the main one. So it was pretty easy to adopt the 49ers because we weren't good necessarily like exactly at the same time when the Bears were kind of winning their championship in 85. 49ers are kind of the in-between period. So it was a pretty easy adoption of the 49ers out here. So I can claim dual allegiance, for the 49ers and the Bears. But definitely, if people want to call me out on it, they can. It's fine.
Week one's going to be tough for Doc.
we really need to test this basketball thing. You said Chicago, Philadelphia with Iverson, the Warriors. Come to Sacramento. Like, let's test it. Let's see if we get the Kings going. Is that because you moved over to them? Like literally, and Iverson kind of just comes in at the end of the Bulls time because Iverson is my favorite player, and he when he became my favorite player, I mean, I remember George, and I remember him and Victor Page, and I remember being like, oh my God, who's that? But he used to be a Knicks fan. I have a strong dislike for the Chicago Bulls. When I watched Allen Iverson put 40 on Michael Jordan back-to-back nights as a rookie while crossing him over, I was like, okay, now he's my favorite player, for sure. And I just ran with him after that.
No, I mean, it's amazing. I mean, Iverson was one of those people, I mean, as you know from watching him, just there hadn't been a player like him who could just simply at that size carry a team. I mean, it was pretty remarkable for someone who didn't have the physical skills. It was just all grit, he's just going to just carry himself on the back. So yeah, it hurt a little bit to see that happen, but I'll take credit for all the team successes, wherever I go. So I move up to Sacramento and next thing you know, we got a Kings championship,
We need to get Doc some of those Warriors rings. Absolutely. We need to get some of those Warriors rings. Gammon has another good question just to bring it back to the 49ers. MCL sprains, is it more of a concern of Armstead's height, weight? What kind of stress are large land mammals like him putting on his knees? Is he essentially grinding away the inside of his knee?
No, I think any kind of knee injury for a larger player is something you get concerned about. But we see MCL sprains so much in the NFL, and they usually aren't, season ending. So I think it's more just the nature of, you have these guys who are basically large sizes who are doing things to their body that their bodies aren't designed for. Like people his size or Kinlaw's size just shouldn't be cutting and pivoting and doing things like that. And the MCL naturally is going to get sprained a little bit given the force. But I'm not super concerned. What you do get concerned about are cartilage injuries. You worry about meniscus. Yes. You worry about those kind of injuries and kind of the grinding away there. But the good news is, for the most case, ligament injuries do very well in these players, particularly with the new surgical techniques and things like that. So not super concerned about the quote unquote land mammals that are that large in terms of the grinding away on the knee.
He's
Beautiful.
huge, by the way. He's insanely
big.
Huge, man. Yeah. Like he's so big. He was working on the sideline during camp, and I just was like, I'm in awe of him, Javon Kinlaw. Like, God help whoever has to block these young men. Like it's insane to me.
Yeah, I know. It's pretty remarkable. You realize that, like, this is why there's so few people who can play professional football. Like, to be able to move like that and then get hit constantly from people like that, it's hard. Everyone thinks they can play Madden and then go out there and do it on the field, but it's a different beast. Yeah.
No. Oh, even like in high school, I was a 5'2", just 90-pound wide receiver.
Yeah.
Ran over the middle of the field, ran into a senior linebacker who was 6'4", 250. And I was like, I do not have that dog in me to bring it back to the meme. And I was done. Called it.
And to that story, I played a training camp one time in high school. I was like, hey, I'm going to hang out with my friends, bunch of guys that are about to go D1. A few went to Michigan State, Syracuse. They say, hey, run down on special teams. I'm carrying the bag. I watched two gentlemen lift me, and I looked straight up into the sky, landed on my back, and I said, you know what? This is not for me. I'd rather talk about football than play football.
Exactly. I wanted my freshman year. Yeah, I played basketball and ran track. And then my freshman year, I told my mom, like, oh, maybe I'll play football. She's like, you can try out for kicker. That's the only thing you can be able to do. And I was like, maybe not. That's okay.
Jason loves special teams here. We've all established
special teams is my favorite. My favorite.
AG Fox has a good question. We'll get to that one in a minute here. We'll take this after. I want to ask about Drake Jackson, just because that seemed to be the biggest injury concern coming out of the Packer game, because he had to leave early. Found out he had a stinger. And this is something I've heard for so long, like stingers. Nobody's explained it to me. So explain it to
exactly.
me. What is exactly a stinger? Because I know it's in the shoulder, but what is it, and why does it seem like sometimes it seems it's not a long-term thing, but sometimes it keeps players out a few weeks. So what exactly is a stinger?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think we all watch football. We're like, stinger. We're like, yeah, I know what that is. And then someone asks you to explain it, and you're like, I don't know what that is. So, so what a stinger actually is? So there are a bunch of nerves that basically run kind of from your shoulder area. And what basically happens is those get stretched out. So typically that happens with a kind of a hard fall, or someone pulls your arm. What happens when those nerves get stretched out? Arm basically gets electrical shocks, and then it falls, basically quote unquote falls asleep. So it's weak. So not only is it kind of this burning pain that you kind of get in the shoulder and the arm, but also you lose muscle strength. So what happens? You can't lift your arm, you can't tackle. And it's pretty much just in football players. Every now and then you'll see a basketball player get it. Chris Paul had it a couple playoffs ago. But in general, the treatment for that is just letting the stretch basically resolve. It's getting these nerves. It's like almost like when you wake up and your arm's asleep. It's the same sort of thing, except it happens when someone hits you. And it can take several days to get better, but typically it's just time. And most NFL players can get back in a week or two, but it's when you get repetitive injuries. So you have a stinger week 1, and then suddenly happens week 4, and then it happens week 6. Then what happens, it takes longer and longer for each of these episodes to resolve. So really what the doctors are looking for in terms of clearing these players to go back is that, number one, the pain has to be gone. But more importantly, from a functional standpoint, they have to be able to use the arm. So if that strength isn't back because the nerves are still impacted, then you can't really play. So it's really just waiting around, keeping that mobility up, and then usually most players within 7 to 10 days can come back.
Wow. Okay, I did not know that. That sounds way scarier. It's way scarier than I thought it would be, because, like, as you said, like, more often than not, it's a quick recovery. Sure. You don't see, like, every so often you'll see one linger and a player will miss a few weeks. That's a lot. Like, I get scared when you mentioned waking up in the morning with your arm numb. Like, that's scary enough to me. I can't picture it being forced into that spot. And
when do you have some kids, Andrew? That'll happen. That'll happen way more often.
Cool. I'm very excited. Jason just sells the idea of having kids to me every episode.
Always. I mean, look at me. Do I look like a happy guy? I'm always happy.
I've never seen you angry. Never seen you yell. Never seen you upset. Well, That's good to know. A couple of comments ago, Gammon had another one. Gammon just carrying the comment section today.
Yes.
Bosa required ACL reconstruction. What is the tread on that tire, if you catch my drift? He also had a torn MCL and torn lateral meniscus. He puts constant torque on the body. Risk he re-injures it.
Yeah, no, I mean, we take for granted, number one, that he's just, he's playing at such a high level. I mean, it's important to understand he did tear his other knee, his ACL, I think it was in high school. He had an ACL tear on one leg, and now, obviously on this other side. If we look at kind of like how people do after ACL surgery, so you look at basically if there's anything else injured. So if you just tear your ACL, pretty good outcomes, you're not really worried about it. But if you have an ACL and a meniscus injury or some sort of cartilage injury, that's where you worry about, quote unquote, the tread. So I think it was the surgeon who did this most recent ACL was saying that, look, it might take a little bit longer. He had some additional damage in it. But the good news is that for someone like him, you can overcome that just with his sheer strength. I mean, he's putting so much less pressure on the knee. But you do worry about the risk of re-injury. I mean, it's obviously it's never going to be as strong as the ACL that you're basically born with. But if you look at most NFL players, the risk is still, kind of in the 5 to 7% range. So relatively low. And the good news is that once you get to that second season, your statistics pretty much level out. You're basically back to your same level, which is pretty scary for Nick Bosa because he did so well last year. The fact that he'll even potentially be even better this year should put a lot of fear in opposing offenses.
I have a question, and this doesn't have anything to do with Bosa. It goes back to the hamstring injuries. Yeah. So Emmanuel Mosley was actually working off to the side during the Minnesota practices. Charvarius Ward hasn't been seen since. Is there any reason or cause for concern that Mosley's ahead of Ward, even though I think we're all under the impression that they'll be fine for week one? Is that any sign of anything deeper, or am I just reading too far into it?
No, I mean, if they are, that's the one thing where you could get worried about is if they aren't consistent schedules. It's could be like, look, everyone gets their treatment at the same time, then goes out to the field. What may very well be happening is that, look, they're having Ward do stuff, during time when the rest of the team's out practicing and things like that. So I think, if you're seeing a pattern where you don't see him out there for like a week or, or so, that could be more concerning. It may simply just mean that it's about when he's getting treatment or what he's doing, or particularly where the injury may be. They're working out a little bit more. So if we don't see him out much next week, then I get a little bit more worried. But if we see him kind of out and doing stuff on the field, then I think we can be less worried about week one.
This is a burning question in here. A.G. Fox, who was at the Minnesota, he was actually the one who dropped the injury news about Trey Sermon, by the way, which was actually put out in The Athletic. I believe it was Matt Barrows wrote about it today. Used his tweet. Apparently, Trey Sermon was walking very gingerly, couldn't put a lot of weight on that. I mean, I don't want you to speculate on something that you haven't had a chance to see, but it didn't feel good, doesn't sound good. But the thoughts on artificial turf versus grass. Now, MetLife Stadium is like right outside my window. So I'm very close to this. What are your thoughts on it? And I think that there's a general consensus about it, but put some science to it for us at least.
Yeah, I think if you definitely look at artificial turf versus grass, artificial turf is worse, particularly for ligament injuries. And you look at, college data, high school data, NFL data. So grass is definitely better, especially if the grass is taken care of appropriately. So I think if you look at most NFL players, I know Greg Kittle has been a big, proponent of this, like trying to get rid of turf, make sure there's grass fields everywhere. I think in general, it's more expensive for teams and owners, but it is better for injury risk. So I think a lot of teams, if they want to put the effort in to maintain the grass, make sure that it's a good quality, that's the best way to reduce injury risk. But it's not necessarily ACLs as we think of. It's usually other ligament injuries. It can be PCLs, it can be MCLs. So it's knee injuries in general. I think when there was that whole thing I think it was last year where everyone's like, oh, the artificial turf is causing everyone to tear their ACLs. I think that was just a bad period of time where all that stuff happened. But in general, for knee and injury health risk, grass is much better than artificial turf.
This is an amazing question, I think, here, but I'll go for it, Andrew, first.
Yeah, and I think with not to change it with soccer, but I know Jason loves when I bring it to soccer. I think one of the big things that they look at for the international tournaments is grass versus turf and stadiums. Right. So it's something that other sports have somewhat adopted. I know is because Levi's is not turf anymore. They're grass now, correct? Right. They made that change, and that was
they're grass. Yeah, I think actually there was an interview today. Yeah. Where Jed Jordan spends like so many $1 million on maintaining the grass. I think that came out.
Yes.
And the Red Hot Chili Peppers concert tore up that grass. That's why people weren't in the stadium for Dwight Clark Day also. Thanks a lot, Flea. Sorry.
Gammon's got another great question. Gavin's got another great question. It might be one of the last injury-related ones. I want to get some 49er thoughts from you. I promise we'll get some fun 49er thoughts.
Oh, yeah.
Have you seen the padded practice helmets that players wear during practice? Do you think the NFL should look into making it fully worn during games?
That's a great question. Like I think a lot of obviously the helmets are there to kind of prevent concussions. I think they don't have the good data yet to see how much they decrease risk. So I think they're just waiting for more information. There have been so many different devices that have been put in helmets to help decrease concussion risk. But I think if it does actually prevent injuries, and that's kind of what we see, then I think absolutely anything they can do to prevent that concussion risk, I think is huge. Because, of all the injuries we talk about, ACLs, meniscus, all this other stuff, the concussion one's the one that has obviously the longest issue for a lot of these NFL players. So if we can do anything to prevent that and potentially even get players back quicker because there's less trauma across the head, I'm all for it.
Yeah. And the thing too is, Doc, is I don't think there's any way to prevent it, but you need to take some sort of steps, right? Like if that can help in any way, like you said, and that's the thing is a lot of people are like, well, they're trying to prevent it. I don't think you can prevent it. And I think that's one of the downfalls of being like a football player. It's just kind of what you have to take. And that's why we should admire them so much. We should want them to get paid as much as they do. Like that's why I'm always pro player, just because of the risks that they take putting themselves on the line in the way that they do.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think what people either don't understand, and as you both probably know, the average NFL career is so short. It's 2 to 3 years. They're basically non-guaranteed contracts. Like if you take football out of it and think we're going to sign you up for a job where you can have catastrophic injury, we're not really going to guarantee your money, and it could only last for a couple of years. I mean, if you take the step back, it's like, wow, this is actually, it's a big risk to do that. And very few people are going to be the multimillionaires. So absolutely, you have to respect what these players are doing and the risks they're taking on their body to eventually play a sport that they love. Yeah.
And the one thing I wanted to say too, right before we get away from the injury stuff, I believe it was in the Concussion movie, right, where they describe what the human brain is supposed to endure. And how a ram who has rams that they're literally battering rams, but they have another shell of across their brain to keep that from happening. Literally, a woodpecker who pecks at wood, his tongue goes around his brain to protect his brain. Now, humans were not meant to play this beautiful sport that we love so much. They just weren't.
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, that's why we can have whole podcasts about injuries. It's just, that's crazy. Like the body isn't designed. And I mean, It's crazy to think like back when football started, people were playing it with like leather helmets and no pads. I mean, it's insane, what we're doing. So it's just, you take the concept of like, let's create this game where people just brutally hit each other. And it lasted, because obviously the fan base loves it. People still want to play it. So it's pretty remarkable. It's still around after all these years.
Guys wore leather helmets, and basketball players used to wear Chuck Taylors to play basketball. Yeah. I do not want that lost on people at all.
Exactly. Can you repeat that woodpecker fact you just dropped? Like just casually?
Yeah,
what was that?
So the woodpecker, because it's pecking into the wood, what happens is its tongue goes in and it goes and it wraps around its brain to protect it. It's something that he casually drops in that movie, and the doctor itself, you should watch the documentary. That's how he protects his brain. That's how his body is meant to do that. That's and there's nothing like that. There's just that one coat around the brain, and it's medical. You guys can look that up.
Okay, Jason just casually dropping woodpecker facts.
I love it.
We're good. Dr. Nirav Pandya, we appreciate all the injury talk. We love having you on, being able to get this understanding of all these injuries. But let's talk about the 2022 San Francisco 49ers really quick, because it's an exciting season. I think Jason and I have been doing this podcast for about 3 years now. This is probably the most excited people have been about this team. And it just feels the most excited we've been for, maybe since the Harbaugh years. What is your feel on the team? And ultimately, if you want, what's your record prediction? What's your playoff prediction? Something we're going to hold you to all season.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what?
Yeah, absolutely.
What's your feel on the Niners?
Say it. 20-0 Super Bowl, best season ever. Just say it. You can say it. It's okay. Safe space.
I will say that the talent on the team is pretty remarkable. You look at the depth chart, and you're like, look at every spot, the depth. You're like, this is great. This is great. And I think the defense is going to be phenomenal. I mean, the defensive line, the depth there is going to be, it's going to be huge. I think Trey Lance is going to have a season. Everyone's how is Lance going to do? I mean, he's got the people around him. He clearly is handling himself very well. I don't really care about training camp stats. I mean, it's, we didn't keep training camp stats 20 years ago, like you just read the paper, so-and-so showed up, so it's just, you know what, it's great. I think people want to do it, but I don't think it's predictive of anything. So I think Trey Lance, he had hopefully he'll take the kind of the Pat Mahomes, Alex Smith, you learn from Jimmy G, comes in here and basically has a great season. Now, is he going to make mistakes? Absolutely. But I think he's going to bring a level of athleticism that has nothing to do with Jimmy G. Jimmy G, did great for this franchise, brought him back, handled everything great. I have no idea how he's handling the situation right now, but I think it sets Trey Lance up to succeed just because of the system around him. I think he's going to do great in Shanahan's system. So my prediction, regular season, I'm going to go 12-5 in the regular season. Okay. 12-5. Which is weird. The 17-game season still is a little bit weird.
I hate it. I hate it.
Yeah. I hate it too.
And I think if they can stay healthy, particularly on the offensive side, particularly with the running back position, I think they have a chance to go to the Super Bowl. I have no reason. I mean, the team's better than last year. I mean, why not? So let's go for it. Yeah.
Let's go, Andrew.
I like you separating what Trey Lance does has nothing to do with Jimmy Garoppolo, because it's something we've talked about on this podcast. Like, I can feel Trey Lance's first interception or his first bad pass. Yeah. And that's something I think Jason and I have already made the decision that the second whatever move happens with Jimmy Garoppolo, we're not talking about him on this podcast unless the Niners play him twice a season in Seattle or whatever it may be. But I really like that mindset. I think it's one more Niner fans need to adopt, because Trey Lance is his own, we're taking a different fork in the road at this point. The Jimmy Garoppolo stuff, it's got to go away at some point. Unfortunately, he's still on the roster for now. You hear Jason getting anxious. Just
I'm getting ready to say something. I'm just gonna let you finish though.
But yeah, I mean, I'm finished. So there you go. Like it's time to. I like it. It's just time to get off the. We don't need to compare it to Jimmy.
Andrew, Doc, I've grown incredibly bored with the Jimmy Garoppolo discourse. But now my boredom has turned into me defending Jimmy Garoppolo. And this is what I do not like about the discussions that are around him. I have never seen the discourse around someone who is not the quarterback of this team be so loud and have things that are talked about that are never talked about with other quarterbacks. Let me explain. Now, a guy who is not working with the team because he's on vacation. Now, if you're a teacher in the summer, do you reach out to parents? Are you talking to your kids? No, you're not. Okay. What I want to say is this. There's quarterbacks that literally hit the playbooks and are working out with their guys all offseason, working. And you know what? They don't take any steps. But Jimmy Garoppolo, for whatever reason, all this stuff is coming out now. And yet, there's ways that guys win, and it doesn't all have to be cookie cutter. Like, none of this has to be, you need to be in contact with your teammates. And all we hear, and this entire locker room is behind him. So who cares what he does in the offseason? This entire locker room was behind him. I find it to be arbitrary, capricious. Can I throw out one more big word? Pedantic. I find all of these arguments and the discussion so bad, and I really am starting to find myself to be in a place where I feel bad for Jimmy Garoppolo now, because none of this matters. None of it matters. Yeah. The reason that Jimmy Garoppolo is still on this team and not traded has nothing to do with what he does in the offseason. Yes. If you mean to tell me that front offices are sitting there right now saying, well, Jimmy Garoppolo in the offseason doesn't answer text messages, I don't know if I want that guy here. And guys are literally trading for near criminals to be on their team. I don't care. I don't want to hear it anymore. I feel bad for Jimmy Garoppolo. There is my rant.
Yeah, no, I will second that. I mean, putting everything else aside, the guy won. He never complained. He played through some pretty bad injuries last year, and his teammates love him. And he's in this really horrible situation right now where, like, he knew his basically watching his replacement by him. So, I mean, hopefully it works out for him. But it is interesting. Like, you're either for Jimmy or against Trey. It's like this weird dynamic that goes on. I mean, Jimmy will end up with the team. He'll be an NFL player somewhere, and he'll be fine. Exactly. But I always say Jimmy G is like Tony Romo, the most debated quarterback a guy who won, got injured, and everyone had their opinions about him. But you know what? It's the way it's going to be, and hopefully he rewrites who he is somewhere else. We'll see.
Let that man go somewhere and revive his career. Let that man continue his career. That's really what I want. When I said to cut him, it's not because I wanted him gone. I mean, all right, I want the discussion to go away, but I also need him to catch on somewhere else so he can continue his career. I think that's very fair.
Exactly. No, absolutely right. He's done. I mean, it seems like they're almost like Jimmy G did something bad to the fan base or did something wrong. Like, he hasn't done anything. He just basically showed up, played football, won, he didn't do anything else. Yeah. Are there some deficiencies in his game? Absolutely. But he didn't like yell at the fan base or spit on people's children. Like he's just, he's just here. And that's tough being a 49ers quarterback. Yeah.
And look at how quickly we turn around to being guys I was critical of Jimmy Garoppolo. I think we all were. But now, like, leave Jimmy alone, man, please. Like, look, this is all going to come to an end finally. But at this point, come on. Like, just stop, man, at this point. Like, just leave the guy alone. And it's the national media that are the ones. It's not even the fans anymore. I think the fans already know what it is. It's the national media now. Like, Chris Sims is like, this is why nobody's traded for him. Will you stop, dude? That is not why anybody traded for him. It's either the injury or they felt that Kyle Shanahan got the most out of him, and they don't have a Kyle Shanahan in the building to do that for him.
Yeah, exactly. And, and we kind of, if you take a 10,000-foot view of it, you have a quarterback who depends on throwing the ball, who had surgery on his throwing shoulder. So the fact that maybe teams are hesitant to pay someone millions of dollars who just had surgery on that shoulder, that seems like the most reasonable expectation, but that gets lost. Yeah.
That's it. And AG Fox says Jason sounds like Jackie Childs. That's a Seinfeld reference, guys. That is Kramer's that's Kramer's lawyer. It is so good. It's so good. But that was my little spiel on Jimmy Garoppolo. I've been holding that one in for a little while.
Yeah. And just for the record, a quick Google search: capricious, given to sudden and unaccountable changes of mood or behavior. So there you go. Jason just nailed it. Casually dropping capricious. Doc, last question I had, and I like to keep the last question off topic, not 49er related, to have fun. And this conversation probably a little more hard pressed a couple weeks ago, month ago, whatever it may be. Are you trading Kuminga, Poole, Wiggins, whatever names you want to come up with for Kevin Durant?
Absolutely not. No, never.
Okay.
No. So here's my Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant has had a phenomenal career. He is, I think, 34 years old.
I believe 34, yes.
Yeah, only played about 50-ish% of his games the past 2 years.
34.
Yeah, he missed all this time with a hamstring injury. We talk about hamstrings. Missed time with a hamstring injury, had all these knee issues last year. People forget Kevin Durant has had a great career, I think. Hopefully he's not listening to this podcast. He is on the down part of his career, and to trade away the future for him is not worth it. I don't think so.
So what I'm hearing, Jason, is with how active Kevin Durant is on Twitter, cut that part, tag Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant knows right off the podcast.
No. I do not, man. I get cooked enough on the internet by randos. I do not need Kevin Durant cooking me. Last question from me, Doc, and we'll let you go. First of all, thank you so much for giving us your time. We really appreciate it. We love the insight. Can we officially label the Doc friend of the podcast? Because that's something that I'm really excited to do.
I was waiting for it, but I'm all for it. Yeah.
There we go. New friend of the podcast, Dr. Nirav Pandya. Hey, can you tell them where people can find you, what you do, everything, where if they want to follow you on Twitter, where can they find you?
Absolutely. So it's just on Twitter, it's at Dr. Nirav Pandya. That's where you can find me on social media, talking about injuries and occasionally weather on the East Coast, the mosquitoes, random things as well too. And then I work at UCSF, so work over there doing my sports medicine practice as well too. So yeah, check me out.
Perfect. Awesome. Perfect. Well, what an enlightening podcast. Injuries, Woodpecker Facts, big words. That was another one. So we really, really appreciate it. Yeah. Remember when the Niners go 12-5, win the Super Bowl, Dr. Nirav Pandya, he had it first on the Sprint Right Off podcast. Once again, thank you very much for joining. Friend of the podcast, official, confirmed. We could run with those sources. We'll get Steph to tweet it out because Steph's breaking all the news on Twitter nowadays.
Steph is huge. On Pat McAfee's show, man. Unbelievable. Brad's on the radio. The whole team's cooking right now.
All our friends on 49er Twitters are cooking. So thank you very much, Doctor. We appreciate you joining as always.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Anytime, guys. Love it. Thanks.
Great. And Jason Aponte, as always.
As always. Let's go Niners.
Let's go Niners. And no Kevin Durant on the Warriors, please. Let's not.
No Durant on the Warriors. Welcome, everybody.
We are live.
My name is Jason Aponte.
I am Andrew Pasquini.
We're working. That's it. We're working over here. That's it. Let's go Niners.
Let's go Niners.